Okay, over at the Ford F750, what I did is pull the engine out, rested it on top of this brace, pulled my engine mount out and drilled it, and now it's back in there again with the bushings underneath it, drilled in the bolts and the bushings, and there's nuts on the bottom. Now I don't have the nuts drawn up tight, but it's sitting in there. One of the things that I did is I put that jack stand under there and then lowered that engine down on it, and it really didn't change in relationship to that jack stand. So that mount is not rolling. But with that being said, I'm still going to build supports up that can brace it off of the frame rails. What I've done back here now is, now that I've established exactly where the front of that engine is going to be, because I have the bolts through the front mount, I have laid out this mount. I've laid it out front and back, and a plus on the height of the bottom of the mount to the top of the frame rail. And they vary from side to side because I actually think this chain is kind of pulling up on one side more than the other side. I'll take you over and show it to you. It only varies 3/16 of an inch from one side to another, and it could be the mount itself. So what I'm going to do, pull the engine out of here, take these mounts off, and kind of see if I want to reuse these existing mounts. What I'm going to do as far as the mounts, how I'm going to use them, if I'm going to use them, what I'm going to do. Again, I don't think that puck will fit in there with that. I think that puck is too close to the frame rail given those existing holes. So maybe what I'll do is I'll set the camera up on a tripod and try and just fit that puck in there and show you what I'm talking about. Okay, following day, got the motor back out again. Now, this is probably going to be an ongoing process. Probably by the time that I'm done getting all the motor mounts mounted up and set in position where I want them, I will probably have this engine in and out about 3 more times. But I kind of realized that from the beginning, that it would be an ongoing process of pulling this engine in and out and in and out. What I'm doing right now is working on that, the rear motor mounts. I shouldn't say the rear motor mounts, not the transmission mounts, but the mounts that go onto the flywheel bell housing, which are kind of the rear motor mounts. And I've taken one of them off, and I'm not sure at this point in time whether I'm going to modify these or not. I still want to think about it, but what I'm doing right now, and you can see that I've got some material laying here, I'm going to make the plates that fit into here and over there that's going to hold the adapter or the bottom plate of that rubber bushing. The top of the rubber bushing will come up against the bottom of this, and on this plate there will be a stand that juts out that holds the rubber bushing. Now, originally I had set the motor mount in there, and that's the location of the original motor mount. Well, what I did is I dropped the back of it a little bit for two reasons. So that it would get a little more of an angle correction going back towards the rear end. Now I know that I've got to get a carrier bearing in there with two more universals that will help that angle, but I just wanted to get a little more of an angle for that, so that there is a less of an angle from the carrier bearing back to the rear end. The other reason why I wanted to do it is because of the mounts on the rear of the transmission. We're almost up with the frame rail. So what I've done is lowered it so that I can get a piece of metal that goes across the inside of this like this, and in the middle of it there will be two holes where those studs that stick up out of the rear of the transmission, and hopefully you can see them. Now you're blown up by the light. These two studs that stick up out of the rear of the transmission will go up through that plate, and on top of that there will be a couple of rubber pucks sitting so that it gives some flexibility, and not all of the torque of that transmission is absorbed directly into the frame rails. But anyways, that's kind of where I am right now. It's a Sunday. I'm just kind of again in here just working a little bit. I don't know whether you're going to be able to see this. The dog is lazying out in the sun. But anyways, I'll bring you back. Here's that frame side rail mount. And this angle iron is going to set on it and support the mount. What I was kind of wondering is, and no, I don't think I have to do it. I was wondering if I should build this up a little bit so that I'm going to cut this back so it's only 3 inches wide. I was wondering if I should have built it up a little bit so that it doesn't move, but it's not going to move. It's got a bolt through it. Can't move any farther than the bolt has clearance in the hole. So no, I'm not going to do that. I'll bring you back when I do it. I'm probably not going to show any fabrication on this side. Maybe I'll film some of the fabrication on the other side and just put it in the shop update. I just kind of wanted to show this to you. I got those bracket remnants off of it. Now, on that bottom plate, the bottom plate right there, was laying along here. Two of those rivets, well, no, one of the rivets, this front one was a bolt. But this was a rivet. I pulled the bolt off and then I cut that rivet out and put bolts back in there. Now, I had some grade 5 bolts laying around the shop, so I just used them. I think they'll be okay for now. But anyways, just to tell you, my easiest way of getting them rivets off is chisel the head off. They're usually in such an awkward spot that you can't really get a cutoff wheel in there. So my best luck is taking a chisel and actually chiseling the head of the rivet off and then pounding it through. I'll bring you back. Okay, it's the next day, and last video clip probably should have been about talking about being able to get those old brackets off that I had cut off and were still riveted onto the frame. I got them off. Well, what I wanted to show you was I also got this one off too. And I did the same thing with the shackle, put the grade 5 bolts through it. Now, I didn't take this part of the bracket off, and hopefully you can see it, there's enough light there, because part of that part of that bracket is underneath the steering box. So I didn't want to have to deal with the issue of pulling that steering box off to get that bracket out of there, that remnant of that bracket out of there. It's not really bothering anything, so I'm just going to leave that part. But I've come to the conclusion that I am going to stick with my design. I just have to test fit it. Gonna test fit it up. I've still got to weld on the angle with the hole in it for the motor mount bolt to go onto that one. You can see, if you can see that line right there, it's at an angle that the angle of the motor is going to be. So that's the way it'll be welded. I've got to test fit it, so what I'll do is I'll mount it up temporarily and set the engine back in there again to make sure that the brackets are going to align before I weld these things out, make the gusset plates and weld these things all out, and get them fit permanently into the frame rails. So that's kind of where I am now. Let me just say this. Some of you might not like that design of that bracket that I came up with, and why I came up with that design is because the bracket was going to fall in a part of the frame where the top frame rail curved back in, and where the shackle mounting bracket is. So I made the plate big, and I put angle iron behind it, not only to secure against the backside of the frame rails, but also to stiffen that plate up when there's force on it. It's not just got plate against it. It's got a backing angle iron that will further support that plate, further stiffen that plate. And the plate is big so that it has a lot of surface area on the frame rail, because the frame rails are so screwed up at that area, around that area, because of the cab mounting brackets, and because of the spring shackles mounting, and on this side because of the steering box. So that was my design. Now, if you took 10 people and gave them a task and told them not how to do it, they would probably come up with 8 different designs on the thing. So I'm not saying my design is right. It's what I came up with. Somebody else might come up with another design that's just as good, or it might even be better than my design. But this is what I came up with, and this is what I'm going to go with. So let me get it test fitted in there. I'll pull the engine back over again. Getting this engine in and out of here is kind of a task in itself, but it's got to be done, and it's probably going to happen again 3 or 4 more times. I've said that. I'm not sure if I've said that on video, but I've said it to a couple of guys that have come into the shop. This engine and transmission will probably go back in and out of that frame 3 or 4 more times before I get it right. I've got a list of stuff that I'm gonna need. The stuff for the rear transmission mount. What I am gonna do up in the front on, remember I said that I had to stiffen this thing, that I wanted to be able to run something up that would support the ends of that front bracket. The front bracket is bolted to this original existing cross member support in here. Sorry for the coughing. It's bolted to that, but I wanted to be able to get something up into there to stiffen it up on the outside. And here's what I'm going to do. This is 1.5 inches wide. I am going to forge this thing so that it fits in here over these 2 bolt holes that held the original brackets, and they weren't bolt holes originally, they were rivet holes. I'm going to forge a piece of 2-inch wide metal that kind of bends and comes down at the same contour and then makes a 90-degree angle down. And what I'll do is bolt it through that frame, and where those rivet holes are, bolt it through that part of it, and have it welded to the outside of the, or the outside, when I say the outside, I mean the end, welded onto the end. So that's where that's going to go to also. I know these videos are probably getting long and not a lot is getting accomplished, but I kind of do it so that I'm not really sure why people watch these things, if they're just watching it to see the build in general, or if they're watching it to get ideas, if they're watching it to get pointers or see what I've done, so that it creates a thought process of what they could use. And maybe they don't have this exact build, but a build that they're doing, or something that they have to modify, and a possible thought to a way of being able to do it. So it will get speed up once sorry, once these motor mount brackets get installed and fit properly, it will speed up, because once that's done, we can get into test fitting the cab back on, getting the engine out so that we can tear it apart and rebuild it, and start that process along. So it will speed up here. So we're over here the truck driver side, and I've got this mount kind of temporarily put up in place. And what will happen is that rubber bushing will sit on this. Now this thing is going to be gusseted so that it's strong. The rubber bushing will sit on this, and that motor mount will come down over the top of it. I've taken it off of the driver's side of the engine, but it will come down over the top of it. What my issue is I've got all this stuff here that I've got to kind of work around. The spring shackle hanger, this is the support for the cab mount, and I've got it on both sides. Now on the other side, I don't have the issue with the steering box. The steering box actually goes through that old bracket that was up there. So again, I'm just kind of not happy with the way it's fitting, and I want to just think about it for a little bit. I'll take, my first thought is to stay with this design, and see what the issue kind of is that mounting location right here. And I angled that plate down a little bit. That mounting location is right in a spot of the frame where you really can't get a good bolt on it. That's why I made that plate so big, is because I wanted to be able to bolt that plate on properly. Let's call it properly. I wanted to be able to bolt that plate on properly, and I I've just got all of that stuff to kind of work around. Now, again, I'm not discouraged, not disgusted. I just need to clear my head a little bit and think about it and think of options that I've got, what I can do to get that mount put in there, and put in there, let me call it correctly, or the way that it should be put in there, not cobbed up trying to fit around some other pieces. So I'll bring you back. Hopefully you're going to be able to see this, and I'll take you around to the other side and show you that the thing works. The only issue is I've got too much metal sticking out beyond the hole, and it catches the bolts, so that the bolts and the mount on the bell housing, so it won't go down. And let me take you over to the other side. So what I've got to do is cut that back. So there's probably going to only be like half an inch of metal in there, which will be okay because the thing is going to be gusseted. I mean, it fit, but I couldn't get it down. I've got it shifted forward now, but I couldn't get the thing down because of the bolts. The bolts were hitting on that. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to take the engine all the way out. I'm just going to shift it forward in the frame, pick it up, shift it forward, let it rest on the front of the motor, rest on that support up there, and I will take these brackets out and modify them. Okay. The engine mounts are in. Now, they're only clamped in, and I don't really have this weighted a lot because, again, they are only clamped into the frame, but they work. Now, I've got to tweak some things. What I've got to do is take a mill and slot this back a little bit. I'm gonna fix this up when I do that. Both of them are like that. Apparently, when they cut the engine out of the vehicle at the salvage yard, they just cut through it with a torch, and I'm going to re-weld that up so that it's good. I will slot that. I've got to get longer bolts. I'll probably get grade 8 bolts, 5/8 grade 8 bolts, and slot that. I'll have a washer on the top of it also. But I'll show you the other side. Now what I did, and I will show it to you afterwards, I cut them mounts back a little bit, and I 45 the edges of them so that they kind of go in at a little bit of an angle. And I will show it to you when I take them off. But I'm happy. I got them off, and all is good. When I just said I got them off, I got them on. I got them on. One of the things that you might think is that it looks like these things are tight, but there isn't. There is room in there. You can see that the engine wiggles in between them things. So there is going to be room for that to move a little bit on them poly mounts. Okay, in a previous clip, I told you that I was going to show you those brackets that I modified. And this is it. What originally, you're not going to be able to see it. This is a modified bracket, and I'll take you back over to the other side of the engine and show you what I was going to show you. It's too dark over here, and I'd have to shut the camera off, get a light, and bring it over here. It's much easier to go over this other side of the engine and just show you. But anyways, I wanted to show you that bracket. That's how I modified it. I cut it back, I cut it a little shorter, and I cut these angles up because what it was is there was interference with the bolts that hold this bracket onto the bell housing or the flywheel housing. Let me bring you back. Okay, sorry guys, telephone. Anyways, there's that bracket, how I modified it. It was interfering with the bolts. When it was a flat spot, it was interfering with these bolts. So I cut it back a little bit and notched the edges off of it so that it would kind of fit up in there past some bolts, because it is a tight fit in there. This is how that bracket was on there to begin with. Now I don't have the side clamped, that's why you can see a little wiggle movement in it, but let me take you over to the other side and show you what I'm doing. Okay, we're over to the other side, and as you can, hang on. Okay, I've gotten interrupted by enough telephone calls. Anyways, what I don't exactly remember where I left off, but what I wanted to explain to you is I put this piece of angle iron over here to kind of sandwich it and put bearing weight on the top of this. I really don't want to weld these brackets onto the frame. I wanted to through bolt them, but because of the way they're positioned, they could twist under weight, because the bracket, the mounting bracket for the transmission mount is towards the front of it, where I really can't get a lot of bolts on it because of spring shackles, cab mount brackets, etc., etc., or the bracket itself. I can't drill through where the bracket goes, so you could get a lot of cantilever action or twisting action down on that thing. So I kind of wanted to, there's a piece of angle iron underneath it, and there's this piece of angle iron on top of it, and it's okay, I don't know what's going on. It's like this clip doesn't want to happen. No, it wasn't a phone call. The batteries in the gimbal gave up. That's why the camera just twisted off like that. Anyways, I wanted to sandwich it in here between these two. So there's a piece of angle iron underneath this frame rail. It isn't really tight because it's got to be underneath these rivets that are on the bottom of it. So there's a little bit of a gap in there, but it'll sandwich it in there where you can't get as much twisting action. Now I will through bolt it, but the through bolts, because they're going to be long, you're going to have the bolt head on one side, a nut and a washer on the other side, but they're long. They still could provide a little bit of a twisting action because of the length of them, and that you're not really getting good metal to metal contact. So I put this thing on there so it sandwiches it in there, prevents it from cantilevering over. I might even through bolt this on. Now, I told you about welding, and I actually think that's a DOT requirement, that you're not allowed to weld on the frame. Now, requirements are requirements. I understand why they would have a requirement that you're not allowed to weld on the frame, because of a number of reasons. Because they can't be assured that when you weld that you're like a good quality welder, or like a certified welder, a good quality welder that would know what to do and how to weld it. Two, welding can weaken metal, especially if you're welding like on the top, bottom, or side of it. Now, where I wanted to weld it was along the edge, which really wouldn't affect the strength of it, because you're welding on the edge, and the edge isn't a strong part, or the strength of the material. The strength of the material is made in the flanges or the column of the channel, and I wouldn't be welding there. But a rule is a rule, and it doesn't say that, okay, you can weld on the edge, because that's really not a strength thing. It says that you're not supposed to weld on the frame. So let me try this. I'll set it in there. If I have any doubts about it, I'll address that when they come up. Hopefully the rest of the clips of this video aren't going to be like this one. Phone calls and gimbal giving out. Okay, it's gone long enough again. There's going to be a couple of clips thrown in here just about the mount and kind of what I'm going to do to it. About the gouging of where they cut it out of the truck. How I'm going to fix it. I'm going to show you one that was fixed and how I did that. But they're going to be very short clips. What I'm going to do is throw some segments in here about the head and the radiator, and that's going to be it. I'm not going to show any more on the mounts. What I've got to do is pull the mounts out of the truck, weld them out, put them back in, bolt them onto the frame, and get the motor sat back in there. I'm also going to put that rear transmission mount in, but I will not film that. I'm just going to show it to you in a clip afterwards, after it's all done. The motor is mounted in there. So that's going to be it, and you'll see some clips, brief clips about the mount, clips about the head, and then the radiator, and that will be this segment. So I'm over here. What I've done is pulled off this passenger side motor mount, and I had mentioned it in another video about where they had another clip in the video about where they had used a torch to cut it off, and that's kind of what it is. What I'm doing though is kind of cleaning these things up, repairing that, but I'm also notching this. What I'm taking, I took it over to the end mill and kind of slotted it down farther just so that that bushing would have better clearance away from the frame rails. It wouldn't be so close. And let me shut you off and take you over and show you one that I finished. Well, not finished, but here we are over here. I just primed it. What I did is welded that spot where they had cut it out with a cutting torch and slotted that opening back like that. I just did it at the mill, put it in the mill, and ran an end mill, ran this piece up into an end mill to put a slot in it. Sometimes I'll change topics or pull off of one thing and start something else. I do it kind of just because I'll get into a spot where, for example, I don't like the way something's going, or I don't think the build is good as it could be, whatever. I was working on the motor mounts, and I'm not, let's not call it frustrated. I'm not frustrated at all with it. I just don't like the way that they're coming out, how they're adapting to the frame rails, because I have a bunch of stuff in my way. But anyway, so sometimes what I'll do is just to clear my head, move on to something else. Over here to the engine, and in my last video I showed you getting those injectors out. Well, guess what? There is what it's supposed to look like, and hopefully the camera thing came off, and hopefully you can see that. Here's what it's not supposed to look like. There's still part of a sleeve left down in there, and it's happening on 2, 4, and 6. Let me take you over and I'll show you what it is I've got with it going on with those injectors. This is one of the injectors. This is out of number 1 cylinder, and this is an injector that came out as a hole. The other day when I showed you that I was taking those nozzles out, the nozzles came out, but that's weird. Sorry. The nozzles came out, but you can see that there's still a sleeve that's in there. And again, that happened on 2, 4, and 2, 4, and 6. That sleeve stayed in there. Yeah, 2, 4, and 6. So anyways, what I did is I had pulled off those engine mount, and let me stop and I'll take you over there and show it to you. I was just showing you that motor mount. I wanted to come back over here to the head because I really didn't. What I'm trying to do is figure out how to get those things out of there. You can't, I don't really want to stick it up through the port where that, a punch or a chisel, I don't really want to stick it up through the port where the injector comes out through, because it's a kind of a tolerance fit hole, and that's above it is where that copper gas or copper washer goes. It seals that injector, and I don't want to damage that injector port coming into the cylinder. So again, you know, I keep telling you got to pull off of things to kind of think about something. Well, I blew these things out and tried to clean them out as much as I could with a pick, and then sprayed some PB Blaster in there, hoping that that would soak in between the wall of the head and that little sleeve portion of the injector that's still pushed in there. But another thing that I have to think about how I'm going to get it out if that PB Blaster doesn't work. So, but I'll bring you back on it. Okay, I don't think I'd mentioned this previously. I discussed the radiator, but the discussion had to do with whether I thought this existing radiator would cool the diesel engine, the Cummins engine, when it's under. I'm not worried about it when it's not under load. I was worried about it hauling a heavy load or pulling mountains. I took this radiator to a local radiator shop and asked the guy about it. Now, this guy does a lot of work on cars. I mean, they are a radiator shop, but he does a lot of work on custom cars, hot rods. Let's call them hot rods. Does a lot of work on it. And I asked him, and he didn't want to commit. He says, I don't really know. Tell you the truth, I'm not really familiar with diesel engines, and I don't want to commit. But here is my theory behind it. Most radiators today are very thin. I'm not going to say the tanks at the top and the bottom are thin, but if you look at the actual radiator core, it is very thin. It's only got 2 sets of tubes in it. It's got fins and 2 sets of tubes, front and back, that go between the 2 tanks, top and bottom. Now, this radiator has 4 sets of tubes in it. So my theory was that actually, if you took the 2 sets of tubes and stretched this thing out, instead of having 4 sets, just have the 2 sets like normal new radiators do, this thing would be huge. Now, I know there's also the fact of the inner tubes, that the two sets of inner tubes are going to be less heat conductive because they are kind of entrapped inside of the 2 sets of outer tubes, the front tube and the back tube. So, but my theory, in flying by the seat of my pants, because I really could find nothing on the size of a radiator versus the engine that you're putting it in versus what you're going to be doing with it. But flying by the seat of my pants and just taking logic into consideration and comparing newer radiator styles to this style of radiator, I think this will be more than sufficient. So when I did take it to him, I said, you know, it's out of an old truck, but there's only 16,000 miles on it, and I just wanted to know about it. And he says, you know that the thing is dry rotted, right? And I says, well, I had it running, and and he says, yeah, I understand that the tubes don't have any holes in them yet, but the thing was totally dry rotted. And he showed it to me. The fins were coming apart. And he said, well, I got to tell you the truth. If I put a copper core, that was originally in this radiator, back in this radiator, it's going to cost you a ton of money. That is, if I can find one. And I don't think they're available. So he checked. They weren't available, but he did tell me if they were available, it would have cost me $1,000 to recore the radiator. So he put another core in it, and I've got to assume it's probably aluminum, and somehow we've got, because the top and the bottom tank are still the original tanks, so somehow I'm not a radiator expert or work on radiators and know how they adapt aluminum and copper together, but I just wanted to kind of show it to you and give you my thoughts on it, because I know I'd mentioned in another video whether this thing was going to be big enough or not, and there it is. I really didn't tell you before that I was taking it to a radiator shop and that they were going to recore it for me. But there it is.